Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar called Engineering Success and New Leader Transitions, which is presented by Dr. Linda Reese and Stephanie Henderson from Leader Onboarding. I'm Jaren Hart and I'm the Content Marketing Manager here at Denison Consulting. I'll be hosting today's webinar. We're very excited to have Linda and Stephanie with us to share some key insights about the challenges of leadership transitions and potential solutions. Before we get started, I just wanted to touch on a few technical items. Linda and Stephanie will plan to present for about 45 minutes, and we'd ask that during their presentation you submit some questions so that at the end we can have a question and answer session for about 15 minutes. If you want to submit questions, you can use the widget on your GoToMeeting box to submit them, and it would be great if you could do this throughout the presentation so we can have some time to organize them to make the most out of the session at the end. So let's just get started. It's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speakers, Linda Reese and Stephanie Henderson. Linda and Stephanie are joining us from Leader Onboarding, which is a management consulting firm that specializes in fostering the success of newly placed executives. In partnership with Denison Consulting, Leader Onboarding has developed a new tool called the Culture Snapshot, which harnesses the power of the Denison Organizational Culture Survey applied within the context of leader transition, and we will be discussing all of this today. Linda is the managing partner of Leader Onboarding. She has professional training in industrial and organizational psychology and uses a pragmatic approach in serving as an advisor to senior management. Stephanie is the assessment practice leader of Leader Onboarding, and she is a seasoned consultant with expertise in assessment that enables clients to enhance new leader alignment and success. So without further ado, I'm happy to turn the microphone over to Linda to get us started. Linda?
Thank you, Jaren, and hello, everyone. As you'll learn today in our webinar, at Leader Onboarding, we're passionate about driving new leader success, and we've specialized in this area for over 15 years. Today, we'll be talking about the challenges that new leaders face, as well as a solution that can greatly enhance their understanding of their new operation. I'd like to share an assumption that we operate with at Leader Onboarding, and that is that organizations see leader retention and rapid high performance as essential to their broader success. Most of you are probably familiar with these well-known statistics of leader failure rate of over 40% at 18 months in role, combined with a very high cost of replacing failed leaders that ranges from an estimate of 2.5 times leader's base salary to 7 times leader salary. It's important to acknowledge that that estimate of the cost of failure measures hard costs only, that the soft costs, such as missed opportunities, can far exceed the hard costs of derailment. We're going to talk about why new leaders need to know about the performance climate and culture of their operations in order to be successful, why we believe new leader fit is a myth, and that it's really the job of the organization to support the new leader's success. And we're going to talk about risk management in the leader onboarding process. That happens to be the approach we take, and we really focus on speeding time to performance and improving leader effectiveness overall. We believe Culture Snapshot adds to the toolkits of anyone who supports a newly placed leader, ranging from an HR generalist to a hiring manager to coaches and consultants, whether internal or external to the organization. We'd like to take an opportunity to get your input about why you think culture matters to new leaders, and I'd like to hand this off to Jaren for the poll.
All right, great. Thanks, Linda. We are launching the poll. We'll give everybody about 30 seconds to respond. All right, and we'll give everybody about 5 more seconds before we close the poll. And we'll look to wrap it up now. So Linda, it looks like the highest response was helping the new leader perform at a higher level faster. So I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. And we think it's really important for leaders to be able to quickly and intelligently identify the performance drivers that allow them to appropriately, and I say appropriately with emphasis, contribute faster. Leaders are expected to quickly drive change and need to get it right. New leaders have got to have an awareness of and ability to navigate their new organization's culture in order to be successful. And Edgar Schein, who's one of the leading authorities on organizational culture, has said the bottom line for leaders is that if they do not become conscious of the cultures in which they are embedded, those cultures will manage them. In other words, culture always wins. And after many years of supporting leaders in informally understanding their culture, we at Leader Onboarding found it essential to do so more scientifically and consistently, and that is why we developed Culture Snapshot. The phrase culture is commonly used, but we have found that people operate with slightly different definitions. So what we're going to say today is that the common definition of culture is how we get things done around here. We believe to be useful to new leaders that culture needs to be described in a consistent and measurable way, and that it's best measured by assessing the performance climate of the new leader's operation, focusing on mission, adaptability, involvement, and consistency. An important caveat is there is typically a belief within organizations that a new leader is going to implicitly understand the new culture, that it's obvious to them. And our suggestion is that reading the culture effectively is crucial for new leader success, not very easy, and needs to be communicated more explicitly. What we found in our work is that after 15 years, over 15 years of supporting leader transition, we found almost universally that the actual role and the operations culture are different than the new leader expected them to be. There's various reasons for the differences in expectations, and they could range from things having changed since the new leader accepted the role, a reorg, a shifting strategic focus, or budget cuts, to excessive, what we call, focusing on the positive in the selection process, perhaps neglecting to provide a realistic view into the new leader's operation. Failing to understand the culture gap can be one contributing factor to the reality that only 60% of new leaders survive to 18 months. And this gap in understanding seems to be the biggest contributor to new leader derailment. We'd like to learn more about your experiences with new leaders and culture. What we'd like to hear from you is what you have most often seen. And Jaren, can you please launch the poll?
Yeah, so we'll give everybody, again, about 30 seconds to respond to this poll, and then we'll go ahead and close it. All right, we'll give everybody about 5 more seconds. It looks like about 50% of the audience has voted. And we'll look to close the poll. So, Stephanie, it looks like 65% of the audience selected the new leader gets judged as being the wrong fit. So I'll hand it back to you.
Yes, and I will say that that's something we hear more often than not. So typically we hear the new leader is not a good fit when really they just don't understand or haven't adapted to the culture. So these gaps and the perceived lack of fit result in problems for the operation and possibly the broader company. The problems experienced by the operation and the organization can include decisions and actions by the new leader based on first impressions of the operation and its culture that are wrong or incomplete, which leads to outcomes based on misreads that can lead to poor individual and team performance, team disengagement, and eventually new leader derailment. New leader failure contributes to organizational failure, and typically the organization attributes the failure to the new leader and their inability to fit. We find that to be a recurring theme, that when a new leader fails, it is about fit, and our experience and research shows us differently. We suggest there is an alternative to fit, and that is that organizations must engineer new leader success. We believe new leaders fail to fit once they are already in their role. In fact, organizations usually choose people who can succeed in their roles, although they do get it wrong once in a while. In order to succeed, new leaders must have knowledge that allows them to adapt to both their new role and operation, and that retention and performance are best engineered after the new leader is in their role. This necessitates a strong partnership between the organization and the new leader. This partnership that is required to engineer new leader success must focus on a variety of aspects of the new leader transition. That's because new leaders are expected to drive immediate results in complex situations. And in order to be able to achieve those results, role clarity and operational understanding must be accomplished early and often. And organizations must recognize support of that process to be best practice. Recognizing the challenges of leader transition and applying a variety of strategies to mitigate new leader risk is a hallmark of leading organizations. We've identified many of the gaps that contribute to new leader failure. Culture Snapshot provides information that helps close many of those gaps through providing comprehensive and early insight into the new leader's operation, surfacing operational issues and revealing important gaps, and identifying root causes and providing levers for change, for high-impact change. Linda's going to share with us some details about the Culture Snapshot and why it is a part of the solution. Linda?
Thank you, Stephanie. We've already discussed why it's important for new leaders to have an accurate understanding of their operation. We believe Culture Snapshot is the solution that not only fills this void, but also positions new leaders to use the tools to drive high-impact results. In a completely new approach, Culture Snapshot revolutionizes onboarding by speeding the understanding and shortening time to full performance for new leaders. It gives leaders hard data that drive the right action in the right way and at the right time. It's a solution that's specifically geared towards leader transition and is distinct from other culture tools in important ways. It gets a sense of the strengths and weaknesses of the operations culture that are objective. It's powered by the robustness of the Denison culture model. It provides the opportunity for those closest to the operation to weigh in and share needed information with the new leader. And it gives them information when they need it, because timing is everything. We like the Denison culture model because the reports are vivid and easy to understand. I'd like to give you a quick run through and also give apologies to those already familiar with the model. In this model of culture, it all starts with mission, so I draw your attention to the red quadrant. We will then work counterclockwise. Mission is the direction of the organization combined with the goals and objectives and infrastructure and strategy that will drive results. It is the beginning of every organization's journey. That is represented in the red quadrant on the circumplex in front of you and is essential to success. We're next going to move to the blue quadrant, known as the adaptability quadrant, and that is really about an organization's ability to focus on its customers' needs and then respond in a way that's relevant to the customers and causes the marketplace to do business with them. Involvement is represented by the green quadrant, and this is all about the people. And if people are committed, feel ownership, and take responsibility, they're likely to be engaged and perform at a higher level. And finally, we look in the lower right-hand corner at the yellow consistency quadrant. And this is all about whether we can create leverage and repeatability within our organization. It focuses on the systems, structures, and processes. Next, I'm going to slice the circumplex for you so we can talk about different aspects of an organization's culture. It's not just the results in the individual quadrants in the circumplex that matter, but also how they combine and the story that that tells. Right now, many organizations are focusing on innovation as a source of competitive advantage. And Denison's research has demonstrated that in order to innovate, you must have strong adaptability as well as involvement scores. It is also important while innovating to have a stable organization, one that can be consistent over time and is built to last. And this is what allows organizations to create sustainable success. I'd like to share the next slice of the circumplex with you, and that is really the external focus versus internal focus. The top slice is all about externally focused factors that contribute to sustainable growth. Now, many companies are focused on growth, but they need to keep these areas in mind, which is you can't just adapt to the marketplace to be successful, and you can't just have direction to be successful. You have to combine those to make healthy growth possible. In addition, the internal focus is important. The bottom half represents how the organization supports the growth and overall effectiveness. There's a large body of research done by Denison that demonstrates that high scores in these lower two quadrants lead to higher employee engagement and performance on a variety of indicators, including ROI, ROE, and there's more information available about this research on Denison's website. Some organizations see value in gathering Culture Snapshot data, and it's designed to be delivered to the new leader within the first 2 months in role to give them early insight before they've cemented all their own opinions. The Snapshot survey is a 36-item survey that's derived from the very robust 60-item Denison Organizational Culture Survey and also draws on Denison's global benchmark database. Culture Snapshot has 2 standard open-ended questions that address implicit beliefs and assumptions that will affect the new leader's transition. And it is a snapshot. It is based on a sampling of the new leader's stakeholders, and that would include up to 35 people who know the operation best, representing 6 rater groups. And I would like to turn it back to Stephanie so she can share a real-life example with the group.
Thank you, Linda. So what we have here is one of the first reports a new leader sees, the new leader versus the combined others. The new leader results are on the left, and the combined others are on the right. We asked the new leader to complete a survey in order to be able to compare and contrast the new leader's early impressions with the perspectives of others. So let's take a look at this real-life example around the circumplex. So in the mission quadrant, the red quadrant, for both new leader and combined others, they show a lot of color and have differences, especially in vision and some difference in strategic planning and intent. Moving counterclockwise, the blue quadrant shows less color and difference in the pattern, with the new leader having better impression of the operations customer focus than the combined others. The involvement or green quadrant has a very similar pattern in both rater groups, with the combined others seeing the operation a bit more favorably. The consistency or yellow quadrant also show a similar pattern with very low scores in coordination and integration. So overall, it appears the perspectives of the new leader and combined others are more similar than different and suggest a few areas that the new leader and his team would want to drill down and explore more. This next report is another view of the new leader and combined others results. On the left are factors rated highest by the new leader, and on the right are factors rated highest by the combined others. In the involvement quadrant, the combined others view the operation more favorably than does the leader overall. In the yellow or consistency quadrant, the new leader views core values and agreement as better, while coordination and integration is seen as better by the combined others. In the adaptability or blue quadrant, customer focus is viewed more favorably by the new leader, while the combined others see the operation as more effective in creating change and organizational learning. In mission, the red quadrant, the combined others see the operation as slightly more strong in goals and objectives and much more strong in vision. The new leader sees more strength in strategic direction and intent. Now it's your turn to let you tell us what you think the results might mean. Jaren, will you please run the poll?
I will. So we are going to launch the poll right now. We'll give, again, everybody about 30 seconds. Looks like about 40% of the audience has weighed in. We'll give you about 5 more seconds, and we'll look to wrap up now. So, Stephanie, it looks like 54% of the responses were for the option. There is likely more we need to learn. So I'll hand it back to you to talk about the results.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jaren. And that's a great response, because one of the first things I want to share with you is that gathering historical information about the operation before conducting the survey is critical to analyzing the results. This new leader was enrolled for approximately 2 months when this culture snapshot was completed. Another important piece of information is that this leader had 2 distinct operations, and this particular operation was located in a facility where the primary operations had been shut down 2 years prior. At this time, only support functions remained in the facility. What we do know is that while the new leader's 2-month tenure provided some insight into the operation, there was really the new leader had some misperceptions, and that the location was widely viewed as underperforming, the operation, the location, etc. And so really there was general agreement, but we do definitely need to know more. So the next report does tell us more, and it's my favorite and clearly shows the perspectives of each rater group. So here what you see is the comparison by rater group report that shows all 6 distinct circumplexes. And while the combined others and new leader groups looked very similar, you can see there is significant variability across these rater groups. The direct reports, which is down in the lower left-hand corner, provide the lowest overall ratings. As more was learned, it was evident they were feeling the most pain as they worked to ensure some level of performance of the operation. As you can see by there is some color in the other, the lower right-hand circumplex, and protect their direct reports from criticism. And you can see the skip level report, which is in that middle lower area, has a great deal of color. And they were protecting them from the criticism and the realities facing the operation. The new leaders' direct teams clearly saw a lack of strength as a byproduct of a lack of common direction, as you can tell from the low scores in the mission quadrant in the direct report circumplex. Additionally, you'll note that all rater groups consistently scored coordination and integration relatively low. So now here I want to share another thing about this particular leader and his operation. Earlier we shared with you a new leader who has an in-depth intelligence about the operations culture is likely to be more successful and avoid derailment. This role had 4 leaders in 3 years. This particular new leader was not only able to successfully be enrolled for 18 months, he is now considered a top talent in the organization. The Culture Snapshot provided valuable information to both him and those who supported his transition to help he and his operation be successful. Now we want to share with you how Culture Snapshot helps diagnose specific challenges and take the right action. Linda?
Thank you, Stephanie. The next slide we're looking at is the gap report for the consistency quadrant. In general, the findings on this page are quite interesting, and you'll notice within the oval circle we're placing a special focus on coordination and integration scores, as they represent the lowest rated items in the combined other report. The light yellow bar on the top of each index represents the new leader's impression of the operation, while the darker yellow represents combined other perspectives. You'll notice on the first coordination and integration item that the new leader significantly outscores or outranks that item. Our approach to doing business is very consistent and predictable. And we attribute this high score to the fact that he was an external hire, and the score reflects what he was told about the operation. And he had not yet had enough experience face-to-face with his operation to form a different and perhaps more accurate opinion of the operation. You'll also notice that the next 2 items in coordination and integration, which are, it is easy to coordinate projects across different parts of the organization, and there is good alignment of goals across levels, were both scored in the lower 25th percentile, very low scores. By examining the data and combining it with transition-specific tools, new leaders are led to the root cause of problem areas and the right action. Culture Snapshot has been developed in order to help these leaders diagnose what is contributing to low scores and take the right tack as they address them. On this page, you will notice the individual survey item is represented in the left column, and in the center column, the potential meaning of the scores or the causes of the scores is represented as well. Once the root cause is identified, then potential levers for change or actions that can be taken by the new leader and the team are represented in the right column. And, we strongly urge new leaders and their team to do additional research to understand what the findings mean, and tools to foster that are built into the Culture Snapshot tool. This knowledge allows them to select the right action and then also select the right timing. We'd like to talk a little bit about how users of Culture Snapshot benefit as well as the recipients or the new leaders. We think one thing we all have in common today is that we work to support new leaders and we want to give them the best chance of success in their roles. We think there are additional benefits to the use of the Culture Snapshot solution that are important to highlight. As a partner to a new leader in transition, you are able to provide high-impact information based on hard data that you can present in a credible and professional way. You get insight into the new leader's operation and its strengths and weaknesses that might otherwise have remained unknown or might have been hypothetical. You and the new leader get to have a real conversation about improving the operation's effectiveness, and you being part of that solution. You help guide the new leader's team in gathering information and taking the right action, and you also add a powerful tool to your practitioner's toolkit. At this point, I would just say in our conversation today that we've gone from confirming the importance of culture for new leaders to sharing tools that allow these leaders to take right actions. We would like to take a few minutes to answer your questions, and I'd like to turn it over to Jiren for that.
Thanks, Linda. We've already gotten several questions, so I'm just going to dive right in. Off the bat, several of the audience members have asked to hear a little bit more about rater groups. What exactly is a rater group? What are the different rater groups that are utilized in the Culture Snapshot? So it'd be great if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. The Culture Snapshot is really designed to capture the new leader's understanding of the operation as they had formed their initial impressions, and they are one of the rater groups that we count. So each new leader is going to perform their assessment. The hiring manager, we think, is also a really important part of the equation for the new leader's success and has some sense of the operation and expectations for the new leader and the operation. So it's really important for them to weigh in as well. The peers are defined as the people who share the hiring manager as boss. So in other words, they are the people who report to the same person as the new leader, and they are really high-level internal customers often to the performance of the operation. We then include the direct reports because they are there to tell the new leader about how they do their work and the challenges they face. And we thought it was important to add what we call the skip level reports, or the directs of the directs, who are 2 levels down from the new leader, who can represent a different perspective that may not be as focused on the high-level strategy and be focused more on implementation. I would mention that we recommend a sampling of the skip-level reports because there are often more of those than there are slots available for completion of the survey. And then finally, the other stakeholders are the folks across the organization that either rely on or are relied on to drive success within the new leader's operation, and those are fixed rater groups.
Great, thanks, Linda. As a follow-up question, Dawn is asking, are the rater groups assessing the new leader's understanding of the culture, or are the rater groups assessing the culture itself?
That's a fantastic question, and they are asked when the survey is launched to provide their perspective on the operation itself and not on the new leader. So what we are doing is comparing and contrasting the different perspectives to see the extent to which the new leader's understanding aligns with those other perspectives. But what we want to bring the new leader is a sense of the operation. At Leader Onboarding, we have some other tools like level set early feedback that do allow the leader to get feedback about their transition, but this is a very early implementation and designed to really give them a sense of what they are now leading.
Thank you. Let's see here. Linda has asked, is the cultural understanding a significant issue for both internally promoted and externally hired leaders?
I would turn that question over to Stephanie. Thanks. So, yes, and I would say that we expect external hires to have difficulty in really understanding the operating climate, the performance climate of their operation, because they're coming in with only the information they garnered from their interview process. And at the same time, when we move people or have an internal move, we expect them to really understand the performance climate of the operation, the culture of the operation that they're moving to. And what happens is, if you think about organizations, there are differences from one operation to another in the way they operate, in their norms and expectations. And so because of the high expectations of internal moves about the way they should get the culture, there is often greater risk there for the internal move than there even is from the external hire.
And I would just add, this is Linda again, that early in the sort of development of the body of knowledge about leader transitions, it was commonly thought that internal moves were fairly straightforward, and that the thought leaders who wrote books on the subject tended to reflect that. And in the last year, one particular thought leader, Michael Watkins, has gone on record and said that he really does believe these internal transitions can be the trickiest, and that they get very little grace period. They are expected to ramp up quickly with full knowledge, and that creates a paradox for them that can make it risky or dangerous for them to operate without gaining knowledge, but it can also make it risky or dangerous for them to ask about the knowledge because there's an assumption that they already know.
So we're getting several questions that are a bit more specific about the tool itself. For instance, Debbie wonders, what is the timetable for when this assessment should be given?
This is Linda, and I'd be happy to take that. We believe that the ideal time to deliver the results to the new leader would be sometime in the 8 to 10 week range. And the idea would be that we can sample their understanding in the first month and then share the data with them 1 month later. We have worked with clients where a snapshot has been provided to the new leader when they were only a week or two in role. There are times when that can be helpful. We have also found that sometimes to be overwhelming, that we want them to form some of their own opinions before laying out in front of them what everybody else is saying, and give them the opportunity to sort of ride the circuit and develop a basic understanding of other people's perspectives. There are also people whom we are collaborating with who believe that the Culture Snapshot could be used pre-hire effectively, that it could be used to help gauge which candidate is the right hire to lead the organization through its challenges, and possibly even use the Culture Snapshot as sort of a realistic job preview to help candidates understand what they're really getting into, because often there is that understanding gap, and giving them a clear sense of what they'll be experiencing can allow them to function more effectively.
You know, and on a related note, we have a good follow-up question from Mark, who wonders, isn't this a little early for the new leader to assess the culture? Do they understand it well enough to be able to rate it?
This is Linda again, and I would say that is a fantastic question. We are treating this as the leader's first impression because we do believe that leaders are feeling pressure to perform early, and that means drive performance and make changes. And in order to do that effectively, they need to understand what it is that they're trying to drive or what it is that they're trying to change. So, we do have new leaders say, well, this was just my guess based on, what I was told about the role. And what we say is that that is the operating hypothesis that the leader's using when they start the new job is what they believe that operation is. So we do think that while they may not be able to tell us everything about their operation, the way that it's presented to them is a very important predictor of how they're going to behave once they're in position. I would also add we have one leader who thought they heard that they had a turnaround to manage and started behaving that way and being very aggressive with their new operation, and once we got the snapshot results back, found out that they were the only ones out of all their stakeholder group to rate this operation as not performing effectively. And if that leader hadn't have shared that first impression in Snapshot, probably would have really been getting off the rails and headed towards a bad outcome.
Thanks. We've also gotten a few questions from participants who are wondering what management levels is the Culture Snapshot tool most appropriate to use for?
Stephanie, would you like to take that one?
Sure. So as we look at the rater groups, we do believe that you need skip levels, which suggests that at least a vice president level is the right level of leader to be completing the Culture Snapshot. And in some cases, you do have directors who have complex enough organizations that warrant a Culture Snapshot, but typically it's at the vice president level and above or equivalent within an organization. The key is that you be able to fill out the 35 raters and the 6 rater groups.
And one thing I would mention is that since we take a risk management approach to leader transition, we are partnering with the hiring manager and our HR partners internally to identify the risk factors for the leader's transition. And those, that risk assessment is part of what drives the solutions and tools that we select to support these leaders as they move into new roles. And so if a director level person, Stephanie mentioned complex, they enter a challenging situation where they have to turn something around or they have to expand, it's more likely that we would recommend using a Culture Snapshot for that population.
Great. We know that this tool is relatively new, but Elizabeth is asking an interesting question. She is wondering, what is the ongoing success rate of this tool in keeping leadership beyond 18 months? For instance, what are the average stats on retention for companies using this tool?
I would take that one and say that's a fantastic question, because we do think that retention and high performance are really important indicators of leader success. We have a little bit of a confounding problem within leader onboarding, which is that we never use Culture Snapshot without putting other onboarding resources and solutions in place. So what I can tell you is that our success rate with leaders that we've coached exceeds 90% at 18 to 24 months in retention. And then we also have clients who look at the extent to which the leaders are performing, if you use a talent management system, in the talent box that they were slotted to perform, so that they're still seen as highly promotable, for example. And again, the newness of the tool means that we will be gathering additional longitudinal data over time, but that's what we have to date.
Now, there's a couple more questions about the survey items in the Culture Snapshot survey. Some people are wondering if these are 360 questions or if these are extracted from the Denison Organizational Culture Survey and what the relationship is.
Because we're assessing the operation rather than the leader, they are all drawn from the Denison Organizational Culture Survey. And not to bore anyone here, but we'd be happy to entertain any conversation that anyone wanted to have about how we statistically reduced it from 60 to 36 items. One of the things that was important to us was to create a tool that would be used broadly by clients and that would not create rater fatigue. We also wanted to focus on the items that were most important to leader success, and it was rigorous process that allowed us to distill the 60 down to 36, but they remain consistent with the Denison Organizational Culture Survey.
Let's see here. We still have several really interesting questions. Bert says, I was always under the impression that leadership agility is a key competency for 21st century leaders, which translates into understanding the context of the new organization. Will Culture Snapshot be able to achieve this?
That's a really great point, Bert, and what we would say is certainly understanding the context is essential for leader success, but if you take a look at the books that have been written about leader transition, they also focus on delivering results very rapidly. And what we have found is there is some small percentage of the population who's going to get the culture without the help of Culture Snapshot, and they'll get it quickly. There's also a percentage that will never get it. And what we're really doing is saying the Culture Snapshot is available to help leaders narrow their search for information and to expand their understanding in a way that does allow them to adapt. And we think it's really important that they adapt to the situation and not that they expect the situation to adapt to them.
So I might add to that, so when we were talking about leader fit, and fit being what organizations say when a leader derails within the first 18 months, and our belief that it's about engineering success, the context in which those new leaders work is the culture, and in order to garner support for the efforts they have, they must, in order to deliver, they have to understand that culture, that operating or performance climate first, and they need to understand it from the perspectives of the people they're working with, which would be the stakeholder groups.
And only when they've demonstrated a deep understanding of and respect for the culture and the operation will the organization allow them to make their contributions.
So we have a couple of interesting questions about the data that the Culture Snapshot can uncover. One of them is, how do you determine which of the root causes is the root cause? And this was posed by Mark.
That's a great question. And you know, typically the root cause is not like a straight path with obvious arrows pointing in the direction. We believe that it's really important to go behind the question and set aside any assumptions about the root cause because, for example, Stephanie mentioned it earlier, a low coordination and integration score could be interpreted by a new leader who wasn't really digging in as, oh, we don't have systems and processes, when in fact it may actually mean that we don't have a shared sense of direction, and because we don't, we each focus on the stacks of work that are on our own desks, and we don't make an active effort to try to focus on things similarly across the board and to work together to accomplish them. So embedded in the Culture Snapshot solution are tools that allow leaders to identify root causes. And one of the things that we would say about the levers for change is, you know, those were developed based on interviews with super users of Denison Culture Tools, some of whom have used the tool for over 15 years, and really asked them if there was a low score on this item, what could be all the potential causes. So while it's possible there could be more, we think of this as a good starting point for a conversation which the leader then carries forward with their team with support of the HR partner or the coach or the hiring manager.
Let's see. Jeremiah asks an interesting question. He wonders, what if the new leader uncovers serious issues in the operation? Isn't it somewhat risky to make big changes that early on or with so little data?
Great question, and that's a really key point as far as we're concerned, which is we actually recommend that unless the place is on fire, that the leader not bring about significant change within the first few months of their occupancy of the role. We have had snapshot data come back where it showed that there were very serious issues for new leaders. And sometimes the issues were downstream in their teams, but sometimes the issues were about the broader performance climate. And that's why having a partner in the process is so important, because they can have a confidant or a sounding board who can help them identify, rather than just taking action, what's the foundation that needs to be laid, and if there's an issue with the broader climate, what they're going to do to cope with that.
So in addition to some of the data that the Culture Snapshot gives, we have an interesting question from Franz, who is wondering, how do you support the personal development of leaders as they try to influence the culture and results of the organization?
I think one of the things that we think is important is that, organizations often subscribe to the myth of the flawless outsider. That is the person who comes in perfect when the rest of us may be slightly malformed, and that's why we've hired them. And we believe in a leader onboarding practice. It's very important to understand the complete new leader and not just the things that the organization likes about the leader. We found that in many client organizations, they do extensive pre-hire assessments that reveal development needs, but those data aren't carried through in any way, whether handing off to an onboarding coach or an HR partner, or even feeding at some point the formal development efforts. We do suggest focusing on the development of the leader, and very specifically in our practice we use level set early feedback to identify the behaviors that the leader may be showing that aren't effective in their transition so that they can be moving those forward.
So why don't we plan to answer about two or three more questions, if that's okay with you, Linda and Stephanie. And one of them being, if a leader has 2 or more distinct operations, would you run one culture snapshot for the entire group?
Stephanie?
Be happy to ask that. So you do run across leaders that have distinct operations, and we did talk in this presentation about going in even before you run the snapshot and getting a sense of the leader's operation and the history of it. And I would say, if the people you are partnering with, whether it's the hiring manager and or the HR partner, say, hey, these are really similar and integrated operations, then it might work to run one culture snapshot. But when those people say these are 2 different groups that have either 2 different customers, 2 very different sets of deliverables, or even we're having morale issues in one and the other seems to be doing fine, it's really important to separate those operations at that point in time, because you really need to get a sense of what's working and what's not in each of those operations, as well as the general strengths and weaknesses. I did mention that with the example that you were shown, this was just one operation of this particular leader, and he had another operation as well. The other operation, we did run a separate snapshot, and it came back with much more full color than this particular, the one that we chose to show you. So the answer is you need to do your homework and be smart about the way you're doing it and know when you need to separate those operations out. Jaren?
Thank you, Stephanie. All right, two last questions. The second to last one is, do a new leader's preconceptions of their operation make a difference in presenting the results?
That's a great question. And I think anytime you sit down with Culture Snapshot results where there's a significant discrepancy between how the new leader and others see the operation, it's really important to be prepared. I mentioned earlier a leader who, thought they were in a turnaround situation. We did discuss the fact that their perceptions were different, and then we talked about why they might be, and it turned out that this gentleman was someone who'd been an external consultant working for one of the major consulting firms, and he was trained to diagnose problems, and when he'd heard take the operation to the next level, for him, in the consulting word, that's code for things don't work properly. So we do recommend and actually require a significant amount of preparation, and there's often emotion associated with what they hear, whether it is that they see things differently or that their boss is very critical and may represent the operation differently than they did in the selection process. So it's very important to be thoughtful and situational.
So I actually lied. 2 more questions. So you mentioned turnaround situations, and we have a question from Alan who was wondering, can you use the survey specifically in turnaround situations? I know you mentioned just now that a new leader thought that was the case, but what about specifically in turnaround situations to help focus areas of culture change?
Yes, and again, I think what we would say is, the homework is everything. So, if there's going to be a turnaround required, is it common knowledge that that is needed or expected by the organization? Was there someone inside the organization that either had the role and was removed or was passed over and seen as not sufficient to run the turnaround? And we have to also assume that in a turnaround situation, emotions are high and people may not always share their true feelings. And I think we saw evidence of that in the example that Stephanie shared, in that the skip levels probably weren't functioning very effectively, but didn't want to show that they weren't functioning very effectively. So we would just say that going through the data is an important part of preparing a leader to use those data to understand the context for the turnaround. We also recommend putting pretty careful boundaries around how the data are shared, and we can talk more about that one-on-one if anyone has any questions about it.
I'd also like to add that we typically assume that there's a leader transition in a turnaround situation, otherwise it wouldn't be a turnaround situation, but I want to emphasize that Culture Snapshot is to be used during leader transitions and when leaders are new to their role.
And that would also include when 2 areas might be combined, an acquisition, something where, the leadership reporting relationships may change.
All right, so the last question that we'll have time for is coming from Nancy, and she's curious to learn a little bit more about how difficult it is to be trained to actually use and implement the tool. And I know on the conclusion slide we've got up right now, you're mentioning the qualification workshop. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. The 2 things that are required for use of Culture Snapshot are completion of an introduction to the Denison culture tool, and then a one-day culture snapshot, and the next one will actually be held on March 21st in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And when we say a one-day qualification, that also includes the cost of the workshop also includes 1 snapshot survey, and either Stephanie or myself working with that facilitator to interpret and then share the results and then support the new leader in taking action. So the workshop is the launching pad to actually the implementation of a survey and the practice that's needed to use it effectively. And then, of course, we always remain available as resources should our help be needed.
Well, I think that's going to do it for us today. I don't know if you have any more concluding remarks, Linda and Stephanie, but if you do, I will hand it back over to you.
I don't think so. I think we just thank you for joining us and make ourselves available to you if you have any questions or need anything from us.
Fabulous. Well, I guess that will do it for us today. We will be sure to upload a copy of this onto our website in our webinar galleries section. And we'd just like to thank you both, Linda and Stephanie, for sharing some of your insights with us, and hope everybody enjoyed the presentation.